Good afternoon and welcome to TexasHold'emQuestions.com. This is the second of our poker strategy lectures, and today we'll be discussing multi-way pots. The theme of this lecture can be applied to both tournaments and cash games, so hopefully we'll find this useful. You'll realise the first lecture we did was about playing out of position, which can tie in slightly with multi-way pots as well. So we'll be discussing your position in the hand, relative hand strength, exercising caution, stack sizes, hand ranges, bluffing, and final conclusions. So your position in the hand is obviously very important in poker. When you're playing multi-way, generally you want to be closing the action. That's the best place to be, but often that you don't have the option to do that. If you're in early position, you've raised up with an ace-queen offsuit, and you've been called by the button, and then the big blind is called, you're sandwiched, aren't you? So it's not a great position to be in, but generally you want to be the person leading the action. In other words, you want to be the person who's opened the pot, because then at least you have the aggression. And quite often in poker, it's the most aggressive player, or the person who has the lead in the hand, if you like that, has the advantage in the hand. So obviously it's very important to consider how many people act after you. Now, I know continuation betting it's been trendy over the years in terms of the change of the amount of time. It used to be no one ever did, and then everyone did, and now it's a bit more balanced. Continuation betting in to several opponents, you really have to be careful when you do that, because you have to start thinking, what are you representing, and does that fit with the hand? What's the story you're telling? So your position in the hand is very important. So let's just take the previous example, for instance, where you raise it with an ace-queen early position, typical type of hand you're going to open with. The cut-off's called you, the big blind's called you, and the button's called you, and the big blind's called you. So there's three other opponents. Board comes 3-5-9. Now, if you're continuation that betting those boards into two or three people, even if there's not four to flush out there, you really need to be careful, because what story you're trying to tell, your opponents will only realistically fold to you if they can put you on, an overpair to the 9, and quite often you'll find that players will call you down with a 5 or a 9 there, or they'll at least keep you honest for a couple of streets. So you have to be prepared to fire multiple barrels to tell that story and convince them. And even then, specifically if you're playing low stakes, that won't work. So your position in the hand is very important, and the story you're telling is very important. So I would be very cautious when continuation betting several opponents. Even if you had, let's say you raised it with 6-7 suited and it's come ace 10-7, even those kind of boards, if you've got three opponents, realistically it's very difficult to get that continuation bet through. So whether you're closing the actions or sandwiched is a very important consideration. You can certainly take a shot more often when you're the one closing the action, because you have the informational advantage, as discussed in the previous lecture. And if you're sandwiched, you just have to respect the fact that you've got a person behind you closing the action, and the person who's checking to you could also very well have something. So relative hand strength is obviously very important in a multi-way pot. When you're heads up and you hit even second pair or top pair, quite often you're going to be quite happy with your hand, quite excited. You're not too often going to be just folding it by the time you get to river, let's be honest about it. So the things you really have to consider when you're multi-way is, how strong is your hand given the action that's taking place? So if you're sitting there with an ace-10 and you've raised it, or you've even called a raise and it's come 10 high and there's bets and raises going on, you really need to think about what is it that your opponents are representing, and does one pair or even bottom two pair, does that stack up well enough against their relative hands? For instance, you might have, let's say you even have an ace-jack and it's come ace-jack-10, 4 to a flush, and the turns are 8 of hearts, and all of a sudden there's a lot of action. You've got top two pair there, but is it really good enough? So you really have to respect the action even more so when you're multi-way, because the chances of one or more opponents either overplaying their hand or having weaker than you is not really that likely. So you just really have to give it a lot of respect the action, and be prepared to make some big folds when you're multi-way. And that takes us on to exercising caution, which again follows on nicely. You really have to, one of the things I'll certainly say to beginner players, the amount of times you see beginner players just waste money, chips away, or money in pots multi-way where they really have no business being involved. In a heads-up pot, you might very well call any pair on the flop to take it to the turn and then make a decision. In multi-way pots, it's quite rarely will you call even the second pair unless the pot odds are good or you feel like you've got good implied odds. You really have to be careful and prudent, because quite often the case you just beat even the amount of times. Obviously, very rarely you're ever going to fold a set, but the times I've seen you even come out 2, 3, 8, and you're sitting there with pocket twos and you end up getting stacked by someone pocket eights just because what else can they have? Sometimes you think, oh, that's a cooler, but people will reveal the hand strength they've got, and if you're multi-way and it's a lot of action going on. I remember the first time I played a relatively big live tournament, I busted level 1 with pocket threes on it. I believe it was a 3-4-9 against a set of nines, and I wouldn't say I was a beginner player, but I was probably intermediate at that time, but I was feeling like it was unlucky. But given the action, when it was a 4-way pot and everyone was so deep, the opponent really only was ever going to likely to have pocket fours or pocket nines in that scenario. So you do have to exercise caution. That's not to say you have to always fold strong hands, just so play it careful. And remember, Texas Hold'em is a multiple street game, and let's say you're in the blinds there with a king 7 in a limped pot and it's come king high, and there's 4-2 flush or 4-2 straight as well, and there's a lot of action. Again, what is your likely win percentage, even if your hand is good right now versus 2 or 3 opponents? If you're sitting there with king 7 on a king, queen, 8, and they've got 10 jack and ace 4 of hearts, what do you think your percentage of winning the hand by the river is? Not that great. So, and obviously another thing with exercising caution is that this is something which is quite popular. You don't often see donk leading, so yeah, checking out position. A lot of time, good players are doing this just because they're trying to massage the pot, keep it good exercise, good pot control, and see what the action is. There's no harm in checking top pair even once or twice when you're out of position, and either bluff catching or trying to get value on the river. So, big tip for playing multi-way pots is exercising caution when you don't have a super strong hand. The other consideration, as always in poker, is the stack sizes. How many big blinds do you have? How many big blinds do your opponents have? And how does that impact your decision making? So, obviously, if you're in a tournament and you've got a top pair and you know you're not getting away from it, and you've got an opponent with a short stack, generally, you can quite safely check that when you're sandwiched to try and induce the opponent to shove. And likewise, conversely, if they have top pair and your opponent's done if you've got a second pair or a top pair weak kick, and you really have to look at your stack size and decide, are you prepared to call the turn and river bet? Because these are important considerations to have when you're playing multi-way. You need to decide, right, am I going to call here and then be prepared to play the next street as well? So stack size is very important as always. And obviously implied odds are very important when you consider stack size as well. If you're there with a flush draw and you're out of position to 3 people, realistically, how are you going to... you're not going to bluff that pot and get into 2 or 3 opponents, so you need to consider, are the implied odds there? Same with if you're there with 1 pair and it's a cheap bet, your hand isn't good right now, but if you catch that second pair or 3 of a kind, you might have the implied odds. So playing multi-way, you have to consider your implied odds, which just all that means is the odds of you improving your hand and what you're likely to win as a result of making your hand. Hand ranges. The one I would say good thing about playing multi-way is that people aren't so tricky multi-way. They are afraid, people want to protect their hand, they want to get value from their hand. There's not as much deception going on when it's multi-way, so I would say it's certainly easier to assign hand ranges multi-way if you're paying attention. So, for instance, if you're sandwiched and the big blind's checked and you've checked and your opponent is checked back on a draw-heavy board, and then you've all checked on the turn and he's bet the turn, you can feel pretty confident that he's just taken a stab there, or he has a weak to medium strength hand, purely because any self-respecting intermediate, even beginner players are going to protect their hand on the flop into 2 people on draw heavy boards. So you can assign hand ranges a lot more easier. And conversely, you can still assign somewhat of a hand to the big blind who's checking out position on the flop, because we know that they often will check. That's just the default to do action. So, and likewise, they know you're not going to be checking back 3-way on 2 streets with a strong hand. So I would say it's certainly quite easier to assign hand ranges if you're paying attention. The next thing to consider when hand ranges is, will your opponent fold a strong hand to the pressure if multi-way? Now, if you're playing against a decent player and a draw is hit, or you are aware that they are a good player and they're careful, like what you're playing, you can put pressure on people who don't have great hands and get them to fold. If it's a limped pot and you've assigned them a top pair weak kicker or second pair or even a draw, and they know that there's still an opponent behind them, you can, quite often make a play and win those pots. But it does take a lot of finesse. It takes a lot of experience to pick those spots and know when to do it. But certainly good players will fold decent hands, possibly not even on the flop, but on the turn certainly, if multi-way and they're aware that you should just not really be bluffing that likely in that scenario. So there are opportunities to bluff multi-way. And the other thing with hand range is, what will your opponents be putting on? Just as easy as to assign range to them. Give consideration on what you are representing. So in that scenario before where I said we can put a weak hand range for your opponent on the turn when it's checked back twice, so draw heavy board. What are you trying to represent if you check raise that turn? Now, they might quite often now just fold to your check raise anyway, but realistically, are you going to be checking a strong hand there twice against two opponents on draw heavy board? Not very likely. So you need, if you tell the story and stick to your story and make sure it's a believable story. Quite often it's not too relevant with weak players because they will just fold if they don't have the hand. So, but yeah, you have to give consideration of what your opponents will be putting you on. Bluffing. So following on nicely, multi-way pots are a good opportunity quite often to bluff the rivers if you're in position. If you're somehow got to the river and you've got a second pair or top pair, but it's very questionable whether you have the best hand, and you're not really going to value bet, but everyone's checked because the draw's got there. If you put in a decent sized bet there against the right type of opponent, they will fold. And why is that? Well, following from the previous slide, we know that what are they putting you on? If you've been calling down streets and not been raising, quite often they will put you on that flush draw or straight draw. And if you've missed your hand, or you only have a second pair, or you've been stubborn, there's no harm in turning your hand into a bluff on the river and going for the jugular, provided you don't give them a great price. They're not. They have enough chips behind that they can still play. You've seen them be able to fold hands before. You'll be surprised how often that works. Certainly, the amount of times I've seen it where you've held, you've held on the king jack on a jack high board, and the queens came, and there's four hearts on the board. You don't have a heart. Sometimes they're really good opportunities to turn your hands into a bluff. Occasionally, you will get called off by the nine of hearts or a low flush that they've just played careful, but there's no harm in, sometimes you have to bluff in poker to win, and multi-way pots, when you're in position and closing the action, often are good scenarios to do that. So final conclusions. Playing poker multi-way profitably takes experience, takes finesse, some caution and wise decision making. You really need to play a lot of hands and know your opponents well to take advantage of those opportunities we were just talking about. And in order to play well, you need to respect the action and position you have in the hand. And, sometimes you will fold a better hand on, the flop or the turn when it's mathematically close. But I think that's okay, as long as you know where your advantage is. And, that's where your edge is as well to some extent, because your opponents will often call those flop and turn bets when they shouldn't, and either they won't get there or they'll, you're sitting there with three of a kind and you're getting paid off on the river anyway. So I'd certainly say there's no harm sometimes in folding the better hand in a multi-way pot, just, playing careful. I have no problem with that. But as always, playing in position will give you the edge in multi-way pots. As you close the action, you've got the opportunity to bluff, you've got the opportunity to value bet the amount you want. So just remember as well, as I always say, when you take an action in poker, Texas Hold'em specifically as well, at any point in the hand, just know what you're trying to achieve. As long as you've got good sound logic behind it, and you know what you're trying to achieve with that, you won't go too far wrong. So I hope you found this lecture useful. We certainly will hope to be bringing more out in the future. And as always, we're trying to extend our services. We do have several services at the moment. We've got our one-to-one coaching still, poker training videos, hand history review sessions, coaching by email. We are doing a big push at the moment for Pot Limit Omaha coaching, so if you are interested in Pot Limit Omaha, that's something we'll be pushing. But just to follow on the different services we offer and how that might time with you. Normally, the first thing we like to do is have an initial Skype call. This usually costs $80. However, if you email us at info@texasarnoldquestions.com, we will give you a $10 discount if you quote MultiWay Pots. So that's $70 for an hour, and usually that call will just involve us trying to ascertain what you want to achieve from coaching, where you're at, where your leaks are, where you think your leaks are as well, and on the back of that we will recommend a coaching plan moving forward. So the typical one-to-one coaching we do is varies depending on the amount of hours you want to buy, but if you bulk buy with us, it's $60 an hour, which I think is very competitive. On the flip side of that, if you prefer to just pay 1 hour at a time, we typically charge $75, I believe. We also offer poker training videos. This at the moment is primarily micro stakes tournaments, and that can be bought at subscription via PayPal for $21.99 a month. It works out a lot cheap, $5 cheaper a month if you buy annually. We also do hand history review sessions, and they're charged hourly as well. Again, if bulk bought, you can save money that way, but for one session it's $80. And finally, we have coaching by email services, and this is really for those of you that can't afford or justify one-to-one hourly rate coaching just yet. I'm a big fan of coaching by email service because you still get, you still get your dedicated coach, you still get a coaching plan. It's just all done by email. So if you're confident, by email, and you feel like you're good at typing, that's only $160 a month, and that's really good value for money. And then you can always just move up to one-to-one coaching down the line when you've made enough money and you feel like your game's at the next level. It is $120 if you bulk buy for the year. That is a big commitment, but again, for the price it is, I think that's a fantastic service. So I hope you found this lecture enjoyable, and we will be coming back soon to do some more. In the meantime, thanks.